Look at this free speech champion. He's signing a free speech law.
Shouldn't have to do it. First Amendment guarantees it. Now, it's law in Texas.
Hypocrisy this nauseating and glaring and sickening is rarely seen. He has been pitching himself as a free speech champion. He said, I'm going to sign in my office right now a law that bars censorship on American college campuses. The First Amendment. And then he turned around this week and said, people who protest against the Israeli war in Gaza and who are guilty of hate speech should be arrested. Now, speaking of liars who are massive censorship advocates, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who we have documented many times before, is one of the most egregious and aggressive censors when it comes to trying to silence Israel critics in the United States. He was someone who sponsored one of those bills that made it a prerequisite to having a contract with Texas to certify that you vow never to support a boycott of Israel. Otherwise, you will lose your job as a contractor in Texas. You're free to boycott any other country in the world. You're even free to boycott other American states. You can boycott North Carolina or Indiana if you don't like their trans bill. You can boycott New York if you don't like their abortion bill. You're free to boycott anybody, just not Israel. And multiple red states adopted a direct attack on free speech of that kind, only for it to be ruled repeatedly unconstitutional by the federal courts. And now Greg Abbott is back. And before we get to what Greg Abbott is doing, let's look at Senator Tom Cotton. He went on Fox News, which has been a celebratory frenzy for months about the virtues of campus censorship in order to protect Israel. And here's what he said about the students who are walking out in protest. You see them peacefully assembled there. This is what Tom Cotton, self-proclaimed free speech champion, had to say.
That if Eric Adams won't send the NYPD to protect these Jewish students, if Kathy Hochul won't send the National Guard, Joe Biden has a duty to protect these Jewish students from what is a nascent pogrom on these campuses. These are scenes like you've seen out of the 1930s in Germany. They should never be witnessed or tolerated here in America in 2024.
To equate what is going on in American campuses, where people of every different background, including Jewish students, are linking arms to protest an American-backed war, to compare that to the pogroms of Nazi Germany and to the Holocaust, and is so sick and deeply offensive. But that shows you the desperation, the masters who they serve, that they are willing to say anything and do anything in order to abridge the free speech rights of Americans. Notice, they don't care at all if Americans say the most vicious things about the United States government and its leaders. You can say Joe Biden is a corrupt communist and his brain is melting, and the United States government is just an oligarchy that is in bed with the CCP. You can say whatever you want about American leaders, about the United States government, and nobody's going to care. What you cannot do, unless you want to, if you don't want to be targeted with censorship demands by the Tom Cottons and Greg Abbotts and Mike Johnsons of the world, is you can't criticize Israel, the foreign country of Israel, and its leaders and its government. Otherwise, they'll immediately start screaming racist, like they've been doing, demanding that the administrators, the school administrators and the deans come in and stop these students, and short failing that, they will call the police on them. Now, here is Greg Abbott. There was a protest at the University of Texas, Austin, which is a public school, where it's even more difficult to restrict the range of free speech that can be tolerated. And this is what Governor Abbott said after the police were called and the National Guard was deployed against these peacefully organized protesters. He said the following, quote, Arrests are being made right now and will continue until the crowd disperses. These protesters belong in jail. Anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas, period. Students joining in hate-filled anti-Semitic protests at any public college or university in Texas should be expelled. Isn't this what the Republican Party and the American right have been viciously mocking for the last decade? The idea that if you express a view about trans people or black people or Muslims or immigrants or women on college campuses that some functionary or official somewhere deems to be hateful, sufficiently hateful, or likely to incite violence against that group, that you should be punished and arrested? This is exactly what has been denounced and mocked, this idea. He's saying that what these protesters are guilty of is anti-Semitism, expressing hateful views. That is protected political speech in the United States. This is such an obvious assault on First Amendment free speech rights, every bit as much as that law that I referenced earlier that he championed for so long until a court struck it down. Here, by the way, on June 9th, 2019, is the same Governor Abbott who frequently visits Israel. He worships Israel for his own religious and cultural reasons. And here is what he said about that law that he championed.
Some colleges are banning free speech on college campuses. Well, no more, because I'm about to sign a law that protects free speech on college campuses in Texas.
Look at this free speech champion. He's signing a free speech law.
Shouldn't have to do it. First Amendment guarantees it. Now it's law in Texas.
Hypocrisy this nauseating and glaring and sickening is rarely seen. He has been pitching himself as a free speech champion. He said, I'm going to sign in my office right now a law that bars censorship on American college campuses. The First Amendment. And then he turned around this week and said, people who protest against the Israeli war in Gaza and who are guilty of hate speech should be arrested. And he called the National Guard on them. Now, the University of Texas itself, pursuant to this free speech movement in Texas, at least this very selective free speech movement, announced a policy in October of 2023 where they made very clear that because they are a public school, the public has every right to come onto their campus and to protest and to march, not just students, but everyone from the outside as well, because it's public space. It's a publicly financed academic institution. The University of Texas is not a private school like Columbia or Harvard. Here is what the University of Texas announced as part of what it called, quote, Free Speech Week.
Why can members of the public come to campus at any time and engage in demonstrations and speeches?
So state law in Texas actually allows members of the public, just like our university community, to come onto campus and use our common outdoor areas for speech activity. I think that surprises a lot of students. They show up here and they think, who is this random stranger setting up a table talking about a thing I find upsetting? But that's protected by state law, and members of the public, just like university community, can use our common outdoor areas. Now, it isn't a free-for-all. So when you say why can they come at any time? There's some nuance there. It's subject to our university rules that are permitted under the law. So we can put in place time, place, and manner restrictions that are really all about making sure those are content neutral. So we can't have rules that say, well, you can't come to campus and talk about this or that subject or express this or that view. But we can have rules about where you can set up tables, for example.
I mean, this was just 6 months ago that officials of the University of Texas, as part of Greg Abbott's steadfast, stalwart, principled, ruggedly individualistic defense of constitutional freedoms, raised the banner of free speech and said everybody is welcome at the University of Texas. student and citizen alike, in order to protest and express whatever views they want. That's the nature of the United States. But like so many Republicans, so many conservatives, he has a gigantic Israel exception to every professed view that he has. Now, I've been reporting on the amazing enactment of these laws that condition employment with states on what basically is a loyalty oath to Israel for years. Back in 2018, I wrote this article. It was an extraordinary story where a woman who had worked for the Austin, Texas school district for years as a celebrated speech pathologist, she had an expertise in working with young students who had speech deficiencies and speech impediments, especially ones whose families come from certain countries. And she would be contracted every year by the school district to work with those students, and she had amazing success, nothing but rave reviews. And every year she got a new contract and she signed it until 2018, when, pursuant to Texas law, her contract had an addendum that it never previously had that she was required to sign, which contained a vow that she would never support and does not support a boycott of Israel. The problem for her is that she does support a boycott of Israel. Her household chooses not to purchase goods from Israel as a way of supporting the effort to end the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, which is every part perfectly within her rights as an American citizen to do, and as a result, she lost her job. And this was a bill that was enacted in multiple red states to ban criticism of a foreign country by American citizens in the United States to the point where they would lose their job if they refused. And here is Greg Abbott, the year before in 2017, when he first signed this flagrantly unconstitutional law into effect. And here's what he said as he sat with a bunch of Republican sponsors of this Israel protecting free speech abridgment behind him.
Between Israel, between the United States, as well as the state of Texas. Israel is one of Texas's largest trading partners. And then, of course, there is the issue about the essential international ally that Israel plays for both the United States and the state of Texas. As a result, any anti-Israel policy is an anti-Texas policy.
An anti-Israel policy is an anti-Texan policy, pronounced the Republican governor and free speech champion. You can criticize any other country you want. You can attack your own fellow citizens and their states and boycott them all you want. But somehow, to be a good Texan, one eligible for jobs in Texas, that requires full-scale support for Israel and its foreign government. This is the kind of insane extremism that has permeated Republican politics for a long time. The Democrats are equally enthralled to Israel for different reasons. Obviously, the very powerful pro-Israel lobby is a major part for each. And there are a lot of Democrats who have all kinds of loyalties to Israel for their own religious and cultural reasons, but a big reason why it's so predominant in the Republican Party is because Greg Abbott, people like him, have a very strong religious belief that not just Israel, but the Jewish people are chosen by God, and they speak of this openly. And they have every right to that religious view. What they don't have is the right to impose that view on others through this series of censorship laws designed to abridge the free speech rights of Americans in the name of shielding from criticism this foreign country that they worship.